Pittsburgh steel tycoon Calvin Nathan Hockley, the son of late Nathan Hockley of Philadelphia, took in his own life yesterday by putting a pistol in his mouth. He was found in the study of his mansion by his wife, Mary Pear, and have 3 sons together: Larry 13, Alfred Fred 11, and Caldon Jr. age 9. Mr. Hockley inherited most of the money from his late father Nathan when he had been married to Mary Scott in 1915. Their son Larry was born a year after. Cal lost a lot of money in the Wall Street crash, so many would think this is a reason for him taking his own life. A neighbor said his family was so distraught, and so to comment, Mr. Hockley had also been the survivor of the Titanic disaster in 1912, which he had lost his fiancée Rose DeWitt Boattaker, who was just then 17. Some may never recover from her death. Jack read out loud to Rose, and his voice cracked. He never thought they would mention the Titanic disaster. Why would they drag up the old news just to sell the newspapers? Oh God! Rose began to shake a little and sat down immediately. Her head began to spin. She placed her hands on her lap and began to wring them nervously before gripping the paper from Jack's hands. Oh God, his poor children! Rose could just sob for the poor innocent children. The youngest is just 9. Jack snatched the newspaper back from Rose's hands. To hell with his children. To hell with him. He gets what he deserves, Rose. Jack threw the paper in the bin. How could you say that, Jack? You're the father. Those children are innocent in this. Rose stood and began to rummage the bin for the paper. They are his children, Rose. He's the devil. You know what? Why do you care so much anyway? We haven't spoken of him in years, and now you're looking in the bin of papers surrounding his death? Jack then just shook his head in disbelief. I'm just curious, Jack. His poor children and wife. Yes, they're his children, but they are innocent ones. They've just lost their father. You lost your father once, Jack. Remember what it was like? Jack's nostrils flared. He couldn't believe Rose just said that. He knew of this grief for his loss of the years of his father. Rose regretted saying those words, and as soon as they left her mouth, she apologized, but just wanted to make a point. He couldn't place any sort of blame on Cal's children. Jack stormed out of the house, leaving Rose wondering about his whereabouts. They were due to the station at the hour. Rose had gathered the children and dressed warmly for the trip to the station. Joe and Jess sat in the twin param, and Megan would push it, while Rose and Charlie would carry on to the suitcases. By 3 p.m., Jack still not arrived home, and Rose had begun to panic and blamed herself for what she's saying she did. She was worried. She couldn't leave without him, but she knew she couldn't stay. She had to be with Jack in Santa Monica in 6 days for the children to return to school. Jack had a job. Hesitantly, after leaving it for almost too late, as it was, Rose took her children to the station, and before saying goodbye to Anne and her husband, she boarded the train alone. She found their carriage unpacked, a few necessities for the train journey. The children had asked for their father non-stop since he had gone missing, and Rose told them he'd be here soon. She sat gazing up the window into the train platform, looking at everyone's faces just to see if it was Jack's, but they weren't. Rose then felt like placing her head in her hands, sobbing, but she knew she couldn't do that in front of the children. The final whistle blowed at 4:10 p.m., and then Rose watched the platform grow further and further away. She was once again all alone. "Daddy!" Jessica shouted loudly as the carriage door opened. It was Jack, his face beaming, almost as much as the children's were at the sight of their father. He had a backpack on his back and unloaded to his and Rose's room before kissing the children. "Where did you go, Daddy?" Charlie asked. "Well, I bought you a little something, and I bought you all a little something." Their eyes widened with joy. "But it's not Christmas yet, Dad," Megan piped in. She knew that they didn't usually have presents unless it was for Christmas or their birthday. "To hell with that, Maggie," Jack smiled. Rose frowned. It seemed like a completely different person than he was this morning. He was up to something and she knew it. She'd known him for 17 years. Wow, 17 years. That's just how old she was when she and he had met him. And now, all these years later, with their 4 children. "It's just a little something, Maggie. He passed her a small package and she opened it eagerly. She found some brand new ballet shoes. She squealed excitedly and hugged her father. Thank you. I thought I had to wait until Christmas, though. Do you know how worn out my old ones are? Megan laughed. And for you, Charlie, a notebook. I know how much you filled up the old ones, son. Charlie smiled and said nothing, but he kissed his father's cheek and then left the carriage. Mom, we'll take the twins to bed. They're tired. Megan then took a hold of her sister's hands before they kissed their parents goodnight. It was only 5 p.m. for them, and it had been a long day. They had been crying for their fathers nonstop. And for you, Rose, Jack smiled, but Rose cut him off. I don't want a present, Jack. That doesn't make it any better, does it? You left me alone with the children. We were frightened and scared. I panicked. Anything could have happened, and the twins were sobbing their hearts out for you. Then you waltz in with presents like Father Christmas and act like nothing's wrong? Rose then crossed her arms inside before turning her back to the view. It was dark outside, and they would pass town after town before they reach home. It would be a long and boring journey. I know, Jack sighed, and bowed his head with guilt. It's just I need space. You upset me with what you said, but now I realize how stupid it was to fight over something that happened long ago. Rose remained silent. Jack was raking his brains with how much proof sorry he was. What can I do, Rose, to prove how stupid I was? All I have is this present for you. I know you'll like it, darling. Rose then turned her head back to Jack, with a small smile on her face, and held out her hand. Her apprentice was still mad at him that he failed, but just as she burst out laughing, he handed her the small box and she opened it hesitantly. It's nothing much, I swear. Just something I thought I would keep it for your birthday, but I thought I'd give it to you early. Rose opened the box and revealed a small pair of pearl earrings. Rose touched them carefully before pulling them from her basket and then placed them in her ears. Jack admired them and kissed her hand gently. I'm sorry, darling. I know. Rose smiled as Jack pulled her back into his arms, and he snuggled warmly as they fell asleep on the train that carried them back home. In July of 1930, age 34, Rose made what would be her final picture before the Second World War broke out in 1939. She played Anna Christine by the film at the same name. She had also had her first line of dialogue, "Give me a whiskey." She played an expert wife who returns home to locate her barge captain father. She falls in love with the seaman and just tell him of her father about her past. She received critical acclaim for her performance. Once again, Megan turned 18 of January of 1931. Rose presented her daughter with a necklace which she had been saved for her daughter since Christmas of 1912, which Jack had given to her when she was pregnant with Megan. Rose had also told Megan about her grandmother Ruth, and gave her a letter which Ruth had wrote to her granddaughter before her death. Although she could vaguely remember her grandmother, she cherished the letter by reading it sometimes daily. Photographs of her grandmother had revealed to be young Megan at that mother Rose had been resembled her as a large amount. Megan also saw some of her own features resembled her grandmother's. Megan had been divided her sometime in New York, where she worked as a stage actress, and in Santa Monica, the only place she could ever call home. She starred in various plays throughout the 30s and became a favorite at a large theater in New York, where she was the main star. Rose was Maggie's inspiration of becoming an actress, and she knew within the blood to perform. Megan remained very close to her mother all of her life. In 1934, Megan met Peter Anskoff, a magazine seller in New York, in 1935. She moved into New York permanently and announced her engagement to Peter of July of 1935. They had been married on the 3rd of January of 1936, and their son Chris was born on December 7th of 1937, and their second son Barry, who was born on June 24th of 1939. Throughout the 30s, Jack and Rose raised their family, and in 1934, age 38, Rose gave birth to another little boy, who she named Robert Jack after his father. The little boy resembled his father largely and doted on his father. In 1939, World War II broke out in Europe, and Jack feared America would be involved in the war like they did with the first one. He feared for his family to be affected by the war. After Japan attacked Pearl Harbor on December 7th of 1941, America joined the war, and Jack's fears became a reality. His son Charlie was just 23 and was conscripted into the army to fight. He left on January 22nd of 1942, leaving his family devastated, the family behind in the USA. He did everything he could to avoid the war, but he knew he would have to leave. If not, he could end up in prison. Charlie remained close to his father all of his young age and looked up for him for everything. He was missed in the Dawson household, and Charlie even left behind a young girl, Marjorie, who he had dated for a few months, and Jack knew that he was sweet on her and had expected Charlie to propose to her when he returned home from the war, but he never did. He died in the action of early 1943. When the news reached Jack and Rose via telegram, they were devastated. For weeks, they could do nothing but wait. In March of 1943, Charlie's body was returned in the States, and both Jack and Rose did their hardest thing they could ever do. They laid their son's body to rest at Woodlawn Cemetery in Santa Monica. The twins were only 15 and Robert was just 9. After the war ended, the Dawsons moved back to New York to be nearer Megan and her children. Megan was pregnant with her third child, and in late 1943, Rose also discovered she was pregnant once again at age 47. In early 1944, age 47, and 31 years after she had given birth to her first child, Rose gave birth to her sixth and final child, a boy named Luke, not to take place of Charlie Lee. But while many gossips claimed a woman of her age would marry and only give birth to replace her lost son, Rose and Jack had just simply wanted another child. Just a month after Megan gave birth to her first son, Nell, and then her daughter, April, followed in 1952. In 1950, Rose and Jack decided to travel around the world alone. It was something they've spoke about for doing it for 38 years. They have also traveled on an aeroplane for the first times in their lives. They flew to Tuscany, Paris, London, Dublin, all over Europe, and then back to Europe, and then to America. They were gone for 4 months, but by the time they had returned, Joe and Jess had decided that they would double the wedding, which was pretty much unheard of them these days. Joe, who was courting a man named Teddy, who was a son of the famous watchmaker, and was quite wealthy, and Jess was engaged to Larry, a local farmer, who was 7 years older than her. Jess announced that she was already 4 months pregnant, so she was married once again. Jack proudly gave away his youngest daughters. In 1963, Robert married his high school sweetheart Jenny Rose. Rose was 67 and Jack was 70. In 1965, Jack and Rose gathered their children and families and told them the tale of how they met, how they told them about the Titanic, how they survived, the beginning of their lives in New York, and everything in between. Luke married Jean Taylor in the spring of 1966, and they had 8 children together, although 3 were stillborn. In 1970, Robert and Jenny's daughter Louise was born. Together, Jack and Rose had 18 grandchildren. Megan had 4 children, Chris, Barry, Neil, and April. Josephine had 4 children, Doris, Faye, George, and Betty. Jessica just had one daughter named Martha, as she could never conceive again, so she adopted a little boy named Martin. Robert had a daughter Louise, and twin boys named Jack and Charlie, after his father-in-law's brother. Luke had 5 children, Malene, Richard, Rachel, Joseph, and Rhoda. On April 15th, 1989, age 97, Jack passed away from heart failure. He was burned alongside with his son Charlie at Woodlawn Cemetery. Despite losing a part of her, Rose carried on with her life. Her spirit had never faltered. She took the world cruise with her children to celebrate her 95th birthday in 1990. But on the April 15th of 1992, the 18th anniversary of the Titanic the 80th anniversary of the Titanic sinking, and was just 3 years after Jack died. Rose died peacefully in her sleep. Many thought it was her old age, but the Dawson children knew she had died of a broken heart, and with just the fact she couldn't live without their father. They had shared a long, happy life together in 1982. They had celebrated their 7th wedding anniversary with the family get-together. And of course, they did raise a perfect family with 6 children, even though the loss of Charlie had hit them hard. Jack and Rose Dawson have never complained. They were never unhappy. They have completed each other for many years. They had set a perfect example for their children, who carried their spirit within them, the spirit which would be passed down through generations. Josephine Ruth Dawson passed away from breast cancer on the 16th of November of 1994, age 65. Megan Louise Dawson passed away from a heart attack in 1995, age 82. Jessica Lane Dawson passed away in early 2000, age 71, from heart failure. They were all buried with their mother, father, and brother at Woodlawn Cemetery in Santa Monica, the place they had grown up and called home. In 1996, the youngest of the Dawson children, Luke Patrick, was searching through his mother and father's boxed up belongings. Among his mother's belongings, he found a diary, which spanned back to 1912, when she was just 17. In this diary, there were old photographs of the children from when they were young, of his mother and father as young parents of Megan, and sketches of his mother when she was just younger. She was a beautiful woman, and she was younger, and Luke could see himself in her. Luke then turned to the very last page of last entry from Rose. It was dated April 14th of 1992, the day before his mother had just passed away. Luke could smell his mother's perfume, and the curved letters of her handwriting had not changed in much the 80 years of keeping that diary. They just seemed to become more scrawled. Closing his eyes and taking a deep breath, and read the final entry to the diary. Dear Jack, I am coming now, my darling. I have lived my life how I must have lived it. I have seen the things that I was meant to see. I have lived without you, my Jack, for 3 years, and it has been more than I could take. Every night I saw you in my dreams. You were smiling face. You looked so young and handsome again, just like you did when we first met. I still remember that day like it was yesterday, Jack. You took my hand on the stern of the ship and pulled me back over the rail. You pulled me into your life, and I haven't left since. I am grateful for you, my Jack, for our children, for our grandchildren, our lives. I am grateful for everything you taught me, for everything you showed me, and everything we did together. 8 years lie from the day we have met. But of course I loved you, then I love you now, and always will. Some things were meant to be, and we were one of them, my darling. I am tired, Jack, tired of living, struggling the day by day without you here to guide me. I can feel it's my time soon. I can feel it. I am weak now. I feel weaker than before. I love her for our children and our family, but they can look after themselves now. We guide them into the world, and they guided their children. Our descendants will carry it on into eternity, and so will we. I feel that you will come for me soon, Jack. Very soon. Rose Dawson. Luke could feel the tears in his light blue eyes. He knew he had inherited his mother's eyes. He was shocked to know his mother knew she would pass away. She knew what would happen, and after that, all the grief he felt seemed to disappear. He knew his mother was all right. She was with Daddy and his brothers and sisters. Luke closed the diary, and he could smell his mother's familiar scent. He could see her writing in that same book, page after page, year after year. It would still feel too personal to his mother to read it through her entries, but he decided against it. He read them all and added to his own little small entry. This is the diary of my mother, Rose Dawson. Her whole life in this book. The ups, the downs, the life she led with my father, with whom she was married for 78 years. Their love was strong and unbreakable. They survived everything together, even the sinking of the great Titanic. They set an example to their children of how to love and be loved in return. My mother was an extraordinary woman whose lives revolve around her family. She raised 6 children, and I am one. I am forever grateful for her and for everything she taught me. To be free, to never let anyone pull me down, for I will be perfect, and finally, to make it count. Luke Patrick Dawson. And that, my little pretties, was Very You'll Be, a Titanic fan fiction written by Original Doll. My final thoughts on the story? I have to say this story was fantastic. Fantastic. Freaking amazing. I am not denying that right now. This story is absolutely one of the beautiful and most amazing Titanic stories ever written. And you guys may know it was based on the James Cameron Titanic movie. And I have to say, I love it. This story was fantastic and amazing. I remember I read this story back in 2016, but that was before I got into creepypastas. And it was like years before I got into creepypastas. And I have to say right now, I absolutely love this story. This story was fantastic and amazing. I mean, it was 30 chapters long, but it was still pretty good, to be honest. I really do find this one to be really amazing for what this is. So this is basically a continuation of Titanic. You know, what basically would happen if Jack was alive and married a Rose. Everything that was described in it from the very first chapter all the way to the final chapter, I can honestly see this being the case. If Titanic actually had a sequel, I think this is how it should be, if Jack was alive, that is. I can honestly see this being the case. I remember watching James Cameron Titanic when I was in high school, and yeah, the movie did have some boring parts in it, but it was still a pretty good story. I'm not denying that one bit. It was a fantastic, well done made story. Now, I did get permission from Original Doll when I first discovered it, earlier in November, and I asked her, hey, would it be alright if I narrate this? She said, sure. And I took a look at this story. Now, the other stories I did see, such as by Original Doll, she also wrote some other Titanic stories, and I think I might give it a shot at reading her other stories, but I really don't know when that will be. But I think I will take a look at her other Titanic stories, and I might consider reading them in the near future if I ever get the opportunity to do so, because this story is a beautiful, well-made Titanic story. So I gotta give a shout out to Original Doll for making this. This was fantastic. This story was written in 2008, and it was completed sometime in 2009, early 2009. I mean, it's an old story, it's like a 13-year-old story, but it's still a really good, well-made story for what this is. I mean, I personally found this story to be enjoyable for what this is, as well as everything described in it. I mean, it's really good and well made for this story. I mean, the grammar was fantastic, as well as the sentence structuring, the storyline. I mean, paragraph structuring, everything was flat out amazing. I even enjoyed the concept of this story. That's what actually got me into loving this story, was the concept of this story. It was fantastic. I mean, it's amazing. I mean, I fell in love with this story, as soon as I started reading it for the first time in a couple years. I mean, I could honestly see this being the case and happening, if Jack was alive, that is. I could honestly picture this being the case. I mean, we all know the original Titanic story, the James Cameron one that came out in 1997. Jack is actually dead because, well, he dies so Rose can live. But in this one, this is basically an alternative universe of basically what would happen if Jack was alive. I mean, this is actually pretty believable, and I could picture this being the case. It's beautifully well done, and I would have to say this story is on fanfiction.net. If you guys want to take a look at this story, I recommend you guys giving it a shot. I mean, you guys will not be disappointed one bit once you take a look at this story. You guys will not be disappointed by one bit. And yeah, I did make a community post about this, like maybe not too long ago, maybe a few weeks ago. And I did share a link to the story on there so you guys can have a chance to see it. But for those who don't have the community tab or access to see it on my community tab, because I know some of my fans can't really see my community posts, I recommend you take a look at fanfiction.net and research up this story, because I'm going to tell you right now, if you like James Cameron Titanic, you will not be disappointed by this story. Like, flat out. You will not be disappointed. You will fall in love with this story. It's fantastic, very well made in detail in a matter of sense. I mean, some of the information in there wasn't really accurate to how the James Cameron Titanic went out. But since this is the original, not original, but since this is a alternative universe, especially if Jack was alive, this actually, I could definitely say it's a fan fiction and it's a story, so that's an excuse for that, so a good one, to be honest. So, anyways, I can't really seem to find anything I did not like about this story. I can't seem to point at it, so yeah, I have to say, it's beautiful, well done, and to Original Doll, you did awesome with this story. I do hope you make more stories of Titanic like this in the future. And as you guys may know, I might consider maybe reading her other Titanic stories, but but not right now though, because I want to, get to some other creepypastas. Like, I'm looking into narrating some Christmas related creepypastas, so yeah, you guys will be looking forward to seeing those. But I would have to say, if you guys think that this is a good story, feel free to comment your thoughts in the comments below. And if you did find the James Cameron Titanic movie to be boring, because I know some people find the movie to be boring at times. I mean, yeah, I'm not gonna lie. Some parts of the Titanic movie were boring, but other parts were pretty good for what they are. I mean, this story's on fanfiction.net, and I recommend you guys check it out if you guys want to read it. And I recommend giving it a read if you like. So, feel free to give Original Doll feedback on this story if you like to. And, as always, I'm going to sit here and say, this is just simply my own personal opinion. And if you happen to disagree with me, that's fine too. We're all entitled to our own opinions in regards to these creepypastas. And this is simply my own personal thoughts. My final rating of this story would have to be a 10 out of 10. It's a beautifully well-made story. It was fantastic. Definitely a lot of time and effort into the story. It was pretty good. I really do like how this went out. I mean, it's really amazing. It's a pretty awesome story, and I recommend you guys, give it a watch if you haven't. And yeah, and as always, what did you guys think about this story? Did you enjoy it? Did you not? Also, what we have done personally to help make this story a lot better? Feel free to leave me know what your thoughts down in the comments below. I'm the Queen of Lions. Thank you so much for watching today's episode. And if you're brand new here to this channel, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe because I make brand new videos every single day. Don't forget to ring the notification bell to when I upload, so that way you guys will not miss an upload. And as always, please roll the outro because I'm out.